Hey there, survivor. Greater than, you. The black sheep. The scapegoat. The one who never quite fit the script they wrote for you. Greater than, welcome. I've been waiting for you. You ever walk into a room where everyone smiles, but your stomach drops like you've entered the lion's den? You know what I mean. That silent tension, that fake warmth, that feeling like something is being performed, and the moment you speak, the mask might slip. Yeah, that feeling has a name. It's called reality. Breaking through the illusion of family. Not the kind that protects you, the kind that programs you. Because some families aren't families at all. They're cults, not in the way people think. Robes, candles, chanting. No. Much slicker than that. This one wears smiles. It wraps manipulation in love. It calls control concern. And it shames truth as betrayal. See, you were born into a script already written, a production where your role was carved before your first word. Obedient, grateful, silent. And when you started asking questions, when you started to feel the cracks, they called you ungrateful. They called you crazy. Because cults don't need religion. They just need a hierarchy, a leader, a cause, and a common enemy. Guess who the enemy usually is? You. It starts early, doesn't it? You were just a kid. But somehow, you were always the problem. You asked why things felt unfair, and they told you you were dramatic. You said, "This doesn't feel right." And they said, "You're making things up." You cried, and they mocked the tears. Because your pain was inconvenient to the narrative. You were too awake in a house of sleepwalkers, too honest in a system built on denial. And denial, oh, they worship it. Denial is the altar they pray at, sacrificing you every time they need to feel right. There's always a golden child, the puppet with the pretty strings. There's always the enabler, the peacekeeper who keeps peace by silencing truth. And then there's you, the outlier, the one who remembers what was said when nobody else does, the one who noticed the tone beneath the words, the one who couldn't smile when it felt like a funeral inside. They call that rebellion. But it's just clarity. You weren't broken, you were aware, and awareness, that's dangerous in a cult. Because once you see the strings, you start asking who's holding them. And once you ask, they turn on you. Oh, they don't burn you at the stake. They isolate you, subtly, slowly. They make you question your own memories. Are you sure that happened? You're too sensitive. You always twist things. It's not memory loss. It's gaslight-induced amnesia. And it works. For a while. Until that voice inside you refuses to shut up. That primal voice. That knowing. It whispers, greater than, something is wrong here. Something is deeply wrong. And one day you stop whispering it. You start speaking it out loud. That's when the excommunication begins. They won't call it that, of course. They'll say, you distanced yourself. Greater than you changed. Greater than we still love you. You just walked away. But you didn't walk away. You escaped. You climbed out of a psychological maze where love was currency and guilt was the leash. They raised you in a system where obedience was safety, where secrets were sacred, where the truth was only allowed if it served the narrative. And the narrative was this: greater than we're a good family. Anything that contradicts that must be silenced or destroyed. And when you refused to be silent, they chose the latter. But guess what? They lost. Because you're here, you made it out. And the moment you saw the pattern, really saw it, you did something most people never do. You broke the spell. You cracked the mirror and saw the strings behind every word, every sigh, every backhanded compliment wrapped in a smile. You stopped playing the character they wrote for you. You rewrote your role, and that made you dangerous, not violent, not cruel, just authentic. And authenticity in a cult is like fire in a library. Let me tell you something they don't want you to know. The moment you stopped apologizing for your truth, you became free. They will never admit it. They'll say you've lost your way. They'll say you're bitter, angry, unforgiving. But deep down, they know. They all know that the one who was too sensitive was the only one feeling, that the one who overreacted was the only one responding to reality, that the one who wouldn't let it go was the only one brave enough to hold it. You didn't lose your family. You lost your handlers. You lost your programmers. You were never crazy. You were conditioned to distrust yourself. But something inside you never died. It fought. It whispered. It screamed. And now, you remember all of it. Every manipulation labeled love. Every boundary crossed, then erased. Every apology you gave just to survive the next dinner. Every time they made you explain your pain while they dismissed theirs. This was never just how families are. This was cult behavior in your own bloodline. And now, for the first time, you can breathe. Because the spell has shattered, the silence is over, and you were right all along. They'll keep smiling in group photos while erasing your existence in private. They'll speak of family unity while treating your truth like a disease. You see it now. The doublethink, the shifting timelines, the way stories change every time you bring them up. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was editing, a group project of reality distortion. You watch them rewrite history with poker faces and plastic grins. And every time you pointed at the contradiction, they didn't argue the facts. They attacked your tone. Too aggressive, too cold, too emotional, too much. What they really meant was greater than too awake. Because in their system, the worst crime is clarity. You weren't allowed to see things for what they were. You were supposed to perform like everyone else, but you didn't. You had the audacity to feel when it hurt, to call it out when it was cruel, to remember what they tried to erase. That's what made you dangerous. Not because you were violent, but because you remembered, because you saw the design. They didn't want healing. They wanted harmony, the kind that comes from silence, not understanding, the kind that crushes the outlier so the illusion can remain intact. You learned this the hard way, didn't you? They didn't want to understand your pain. They wanted you to explain it away. But your soul refused. You stopped translating your trauma into something they could tolerate. You started speaking the raw language of truth, unfiltered, unapproved, unforgivable in their world. They didn't exile you because you were wrong. They exiled you because you were right. Because once you named the thing out loud, the spell cracked. The mirrors trembled. The whole house of cards started shaking. That was the beginning of the end for them. They can't control what they can't confuse. They can't shame what won't kneel. They can't gaslight what has become flame. And you're not a mirror anymore. You're a torch. You walk into rooms and things fall apart. Not because you break them, but because you reveal their shape. You turned on the lights and the roaches scattered. Not everyone clapped, but you weren't looking for applause. You were looking for peace. Not the fake kind that sits atop a mountain of secrets, but the kind that grows in the light of truth. It's strange at first, isn't it? To walk away from what they call home and realize you're finally safe. To stop editing yourself. To stop checking your tone. To stop anticipating judgment like a second heartbeat. It feels empty. At first, like the silence after a fire, like standing in the ashes of what raised you, and realizing it wasn't love. It was loyalty. Loyalty to dysfunction. Loyalty to rules you never agreed to. Loyalty to people who fed off your self-doubt and called it connection. But silence isn't emptiness. It's a space. Space to breathe, to rebuild, to remember who you were before the programming began. You weren't born broken. You were targeted because you carried something they feared. A voice, a vision, a defiance that couldn't be reasoned away. They threw every trick at you. Projection, isolation, guilt, shame. And when those didn't work, they played dead. Emotional withdrawal, the final weapon, the silent treatment, dressed in righteous robes. But they never expected you to survive that. They thought silence would shrink you. Instead, it became your echo chamber. You screamed into it, and something screamed back. Yourself. The real you. The one who remembered. The one who never stopped watching. The one who was always waiting behind your ribs, whispering, greater than don't fold. And you didn't. You cracked. You bled. You shattered. But you didn't fold. Because somewhere deep in that psychological war zone, you made a decision. Not to fight, not to win, but to wake up. And that terrified them more than any outburst ever could. Because people trapped in illusions don't fear rebels. They fear mirrors, and that's what you became. A mirror they couldn't smash without seeing themselves first. You weren't the villain, you were the evidence. The living, breathing, unignorable proof that the system had flaws, that the stories had holes, that the love had conditions, and that's heresy in a cult. You walked through fire and didn't ask for water. You asked for truth. You peeled back the roles, the golden child, the martyr, the silent one. You stripped them bare, and you said, greater than none of this is real, unless it's honest. And they panicked, because honesty requires accountability, and they built their temple on denial. You didn't leave because you hate them. You left because you love yourself now. And that's the revolution, not revenge, not confrontation, but the quiet, devastating act of choosing peace over performance. You're not bitter. You're clean. You're not angry. You're awake. And nothing terrifies a cult system more than someone who sees clearly and still chooses to walk away. You didn't just survive. You exposed it, and they'll twist it. They'll rebrand it. They'll say you were unstable, difficult, disrespectful. But their version of respect was obedience, and you don't kneel anymore. You built your spine back from broken glass. You remembered your voice in the vacuum. You raised your own inner child from the ruins. They tried to shame you back into silence. But shame doesn't work on someone who has seen the architecture of their manipulation. You saw the rituals. You named the hierarchy. You decoded the language. You learned the cult. And you walked out without a scratch on your soul. They won't admit it. But deep down, in the quiet of their own rehearsed lives, when the smiles fade and the mask slips for just a second, they know the truth now lives outside their circle. It lives in you, and it's louder than ever. They'll say you abandoned the family, but abandonment was their first language. They just spoke it in ways that didn't leave bruises. They abandoned your emotions while hugging your shoulders. They abandoned your truth while praising your achievements. They abandoned your identity while celebrating your existence. As long as it stayed within the script. What they wanted wasn't a person. They wanted a reflection, a controllable, agreeable, silent reflection. You shattered that mirror the moment you said, greater than this hurts. You didn't scream. You didn't burn the house down. You named it. And in a system built on secrecy, Naming things is an act of war. You became dangerous the moment you chose clarity over comfort. The moment you stopped translating their abuse into politeness. The moment you stopped making yourself small to make them feel big. They were never comfortable with your power. Because it wasn't loud. It was rooted. It wasn't rebellion. It was remembrance. A remembering of the child who noticed the tension but didn't have the words. A remembering of the teenager who questioned the silence but was told they were too much. A remembering of the adult who finally stopped apologizing for the discomfort their truth caused. You weren't angry. You were activated. They mistook your boundaries for bitterness. But bitterness is what grows in people who stay silent. What you carry isn't bitterness, it's fire. And fire doesn't apologize for burning the lies down. You stopped trying to fix the system from the inside. You stopped bleeding for the privilege of staying at the table. You stood up. You walked out. And for the first time, you fed yourself. They won't tell that part of the story. They'll say you changed. They'll say you became cold. They'll say you lost your way. But your way was never theirs to define. You were always headed somewhere deeper, somewhere truer, somewhere unreachable by performance. They don't know what to do with someone who stops needing their approval. Because in cult dynamics, approval is oxygen. It's the invisible leash. They give it when you obey. They take it when you question. But you stopped gasping for it. You started breathing something cleaner, something yours. It terrified them. Not because they hate you, but because you broke the agreement, the unspoken pact, the generational contract. Greater than, we don't talk about the pain. We don't name the abuse. We smile. We comply. Greater than, we protect the structure, no matter what it costs the soul. You broke it. You let the cracks show. You refused to keep secrets that rotted your insides. And in doing that, you did what they could not. You became free. Freedom doesn't look like fireworks and cheers. It looks like lonely dinners and quiet clarity. It looks like deleting numbers and blocking toxicity. It looks like learning to sleep in silence without guilt gnawing at your ribs. You thought healing would feel triumphant. But sometimes it feels like grief, like mourning a family that never really existed, except in the photos where everyone smiled through clenched teeth. You weren't crazy. You were awake in the dream, and that made you the heretic, the one who looked around and whispered, "This isn't love. This is theater." Love doesn't gaslight. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't require you to betray yourself to stay included. You didn't walk away from love. You walked toward it. You became your own safety net, your own witness, your own sanctuary. And in that aloneness, something ancient rose in you. Not rage, not revenge, sovereignty. The kind of power that doesn't scream. It radiates. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. The kind that walks into a room and changes the air. They feel it. Even if they never say it, they feel that something in you has shifted permanently. You no longer bend, not because you're rigid, but because you're whole. There's no role for you in their play anymore. You left the stage. You wrote your own script. And this time, you're the author. You're the actor. You're the audience. You're not waiting for anyone to clap. You're not waiting for anyone to validate the pain. You're not waiting for an apology carved in cold stone, because the apology lives in your liberation. The apology lives in your clarity. The apology lives in every breath you take that isn't laced with performance. You became the closure they refused to give you. And that's the most radical thing you could have done. You don't flinch anymore when your phone goes quiet. You don't scan every message for hidden daggers wrapped in just checking in. You don't decode their silence like it's your responsibility to fix what they never had the courage to say. Because you've seen behind the curtain, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. That fake concern wasn't love. It was control dressed in manners. That unexpected gift wasn't generosity. It was a tether. That forced family gathering, a stage, a ritual, a manipulation cycle with a fruit bowl in the center, you started recognizing it. The cycle. Tension, explosion, silence, guilt, reunion, fake peace. Repeat. They called it normal. You called it out. That's when the masks really started melting. Suddenly the ones who never had time for you were hurt that you stepped away. Suddenly your distance was selfish. Suddenly your healing was the threat. Because healing without them meant facing the truth. They were never the source of your safety. They were the storm you kept calling shelter. You stopped explaining, stopped defending, stopped offering your story up like it needed to be palatable, to count. That shift was seismic, not loud, but tectonic. It rearranged your bones, your nervous system, your boundaries. It rewired the part of you that used to call chaos home. They never prepared for that. They prepared for rebellion, for tantrums, for confrontation. They didn't prepare for your silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of arrival. The silence of someone who no longer needs the room to understand why they left it. Because something happened in that silence, didn't it? You began to remember who you were. Before the guilt. Before the roles. Before the invisible contracts that told you love was something to earn. You remembered the younger version of you. The one who stared too long, asked too much, cried too easily. That version they tried to correct, to mute, to shape into something they could use. But they failed. Because that version of you didn't die. It went underground. It waited. It watched. And when the system collapsed, it crawled out of the ruins and said, "We're not going back." And you didn't. They tried to lure you with old language. Family matters. Blood is thicker. Don't be like this. But the spell was broken. You read the fine print in the family contract. You saw the clauses, unconditional love, footnoted with obedience, support, followed by guilt. Inclusion, only with performance. And you said, decline, not because you're above them, but because you're finally beside yourself. Beside the child who never got protected. Beside the teen who knew the rules were rigged. Beside the adult who refused to forget. That alignment? It's louder than any reunion could ever be. You're no longer willing to dim yourself for a seat at a crooked table. You'd rather eat alone. With your dignity, your truth, your spine intact. Because they didn't raise you. They trained you. And training breaks, but truth returns. You weren't rebellious. You were remembering, and memory, when it finally arrives, is thunder. It shakes the foundations, not just of your house, but theirs too. Because once one person leaves the system and thrives, they all start wondering what else was a lie. That's the thing they'll never say out loud. Your healing is contagious. Your clarity is viral. Your freedom threatens every illusion they still cling to. You've become a symbol, not just of rebellion, but of possibility. That maybe, just maybe, you don't have to die inside to belong. That maybe, just maybe, love doesn't demand your silence. That maybe, just maybe, the most loyal thing you ever did was walk away. They'll call you lost, but deep down they know. You found something they were too afraid to search for. They'll say you're cold, but it's only because you stopped burning yourself alive to keep their illusions warm. They'll say you gave up on family, but you never gave up. You just stopped confusing proximity with love. You stopped calling pain tradition. You stopped worshiping dysfunction just because it wore a familiar face. You stopped bleeding for a legacy built on silence and shame. And what they fear most is that you're not looking back. You didn't just escape. You didn't just survive. You evolved. You outgrew the cage they mistook for culture. You shed the skin of guilt they draped over your shoulders like a family heirloom. You became someone they can't define anymore. And that's the real liberation. You know how to spot it now. The manipulation cloaked in nostalgia, the backhanded concern dressed as care, the empty invitations that still reek of control. You don't take the bait, not because you're angry, because you're clear. Your time is sacred. Your energy is earned. Your presence is no longer a free pass for emotional trespassers. You carry peace like armor now. Not the shallow pretend kind they perform during holidays, but the deep quiet kind that comes when you finally belong to yourself. You choose silence over spectacle, peace over performance, reality over ritual. And every step you take in truth sends cracks running through the lies they built their world on. They'll never say it out loud, but they feel it. The weight of your absence, the power of your boundaries, the echo of your name no longer whispered with judgment, but with awe.